The lantern oil caught flame with a soft whoosh, casting dancing shadows across Sarah Fitzgerald's weathered hands as she stood on the porch of the general store in Red Bluff, California, watching the sun sink behind the distant Sierra Nevada mountains. She had performed this ritual every evening for the past 3 years since her father's death, lighting the lanterns that guided weary travelers and cowboys into town when darkness fell across the dusty streets. Tonight, however, something felt different in the October air of 1878, as though the world itself held its breath in anticipation. Sarah touched the match to the second lantern, then the third, their warm glow pushing back against the encroaching twilight. At 22 years old, she had grown accustomed to the lonely routine of managing the store, serving the ranchers and miners who passed through this small settlement on the Sacramento River. Her auburn hair, typically bound in a practical bun, had begun to escape its pins throughout the long day, and a few rebellious strands caught the lantern light like copper wire. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention toward the eastern road, where a lone rider approached at an unhurried pace. Even in the fading light, Sarah could make out the exhausted slump of the man's shoulders and the way his horse moved with the careful steps of an animal that had traveled far. She lit the fourth lantern and hung it on its hook, then waited as proper hospitality demanded. The cowboy who dismounted before the store hitched post looked to be in his mid-20s, tall and lean with several days of dark stubble shadowing his jaw. His clothes spoke of hard travel, dust coating every surface, and when he removed his hat to wipe his brow, Sarah caught sight of intense blue eyes that seemed to carry a weight far heavier than the saddlebags he lifted from his horse. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice rough from either thirst or disuse. "Store still open." "For another hour," Sarah replied, studying him with the careful assessment she had learned from her father. Not a drifter, she decided, noting the quality of his worn gear and the well-maintained rifle in his saddle holster. A working man fallen on hard times, perhaps. "You look like you could use water. There's a pump around the side for you and your horse." Something flickered in those blue eyes, surprise maybe, or gratitude. He nodded and led his mount away, and Sarah returned inside to light the interior lamps. The familiar smell of coffee, leather, and dry goods surrounded her as she moved through the cramped aisles, straightening merchandise that did not need straightening, listening to the sounds of man and horse drinking their fill outside. When the cowboy entered, removing his hat once more, Sarah stood behind the counter with her hands folded primly before her. The lamplight revealed more details: a strong jaw, sun-weathered skin, and a scar that traced a thin line along his left cheekbone. His eyes, however, drew her attention most powerfully. They held a darkness she recognized, the kind that came from loss rather than malice. "Much obliged for the water," he said, approaching the counter. "Name's Patrick Vance. I'm looking for work if you know of any ranches hiring." "Sarah Fitzgerald," she replied, then considered his question. "The Morrison Ranch about 5 miles north usually needs hands, especially this time of year with the cattle drive coming up. The gold mines always need workers too, though that's harder labor." Patrick nodded slowly, his gaze drifting past her to scan the shelves behind the counter. "I'll try the ranch first. Mining's not for me. Need some supplies if I'm to make it another week, though I'll be honest with you, Miss Fitzgerald. My funds are limited." Sarah appreciated his directness. Too many men tried to wheedle credit with elaborate stories and false promises. "What do you need?" "Coffee, beans, salt pork if you have it. Ammunition for a Winchester." He paused, then met her eyes with surprising intensity. "And I'll work for it if you've got tasks that need doing." I'm good with my hands, can fix most anything." Before Sarah could respond, the door burst open and Tommy Chen rushed in, the 12-year-old son of the local laundress, his face flushed with exertion. "Miss Sarah, come quick. There's trouble at the saloon." Mr. Henderson's drunk again and waving his pistol around, saying he's going to shoot every lantern in town because the light hurts his eyes. Sarah's stomach tightened. Jack Henderson was a mean drunk with a hair-trigger temper, and this was not his first such episode. Last month he had shot out 3 windows before the sheriff managed to talk him down, and Sheriff Porter was currently in Sacramento testifying at a trial. She grabbed her shawl, then paused, glancing at Patrick. "Stay here if you want," she said. "This isn't your concern." But Patrick was already settling his hat back on his head, his expression grim. "A man threatening to shoot up a town is everyone's concern, Miss Fitzgerald. I'll walk with you." They hurried into the gathering darkness, Tommy leading the way toward the Yellow Rose Saloon, where a crowd had gathered at a safe distance. True to the boy's word, Jack Henderson stood in the middle of the street, a whiskey bottle in one hand and his revolver in the other, shouting incoherently at the lantern Sarah had lit. "Somebody get that fool inside before he hurts someone," old Mrs. Palmer called from her boarding house porch. Patrick touched Sarah's arm gently, stopping her several yards from the agitated man. "Let me try talking to him. You stay back here." "You don't know him," Sarah protested. "Jack's unpredictable when he's like this." "I know men like him," Patrick said quietly. "Lost souls trying to drown their pain in a bottle. Please, Miss Fitzgerald, just give me a chance." Something in his voice, a note of personal understanding, made Sarah step back. She watched as Patrick walked forward with his hands clearly visible and empty, his posture unthreatening but confident. "Friend," Patrick called out when he was 10 feet away. "That's a fine revolver you've got there. Colt Peacemaker, if I'm not mistaken." Jack swung toward him, the gun wobbling but pointed in Patrick's general direction. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Patrick Vance. Just rode into town. I couldn't help but notice you've got a problem with those lanterns." He gestured toward the glowing lights along the street. "Mind if I ask why?" "They're too bright," Jack slurred, swaying slightly. "Can't sleep with all that light, reminds me of the fire, everything burning, can't make it stop." Patrick nodded slowly, taking another careful step forward. "I understand, I truly do. I've got my own demons that keep me awake at night, images I can't shake no matter how much I drink or how far I ride." His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the audience. "But shooting those lanterns won't make the memories go away. Trust me, I've tried destroying things to feel better. It doesn't work." "How would you know?" Jack demanded, but his gun hand had lowered slightly. "Because 2 years ago I lost my entire family to a barn fire back in Wyoming territory," Patrick said, and Sarah felt her heart clench at the raw pain in his words. "My wife, my little boy, my parents. All gone in one night because I was too drunk in town to notice the lightning strike. I've spent every day since trying to outrun that memory, but it follows me everywhere." The street had gone silent except for the distant sound of the river and the soft creak of lanterns swaying in the breeze. Jack's face crumpled, tears mixing with the sweat on his cheeks. "My daughter," he whispered. "Lost her to fever last spring. Can't stop seeing her suffer." "I know," Patrick said gently, now standing directly before the broken man. He carefully reached out and took the revolver from Jack's unresisting hand, then placed his other arm around the sobbing man's shoulders. "I know, friend, but your daughter wouldn't want you hurting yourself or others. She'd want you to live, to remember her with love, not pain." Sarah found herself blinking back tears as she watched Patrick guide Jack toward the saloon, speaking too quietly for her to hear. Several men came forward to help, including the bartender who promised to see Jack safely to bed. The crowd began to disperse, people murmuring about the stranger who had diffused a dangerous situation with nothing but understanding and honesty. Patrick returned to where Sarah stood, his expression weary. "Apologies for speaking so personal in front of everyone. Sometimes that's what it takes." "You saved lives tonight," Sarah said softly. "Including his own, likely. Thank you," he shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just did what needed doing. We should get back to the store before it gets full dark." They walked in silence back to the general store, where Sarah unlocked the door and lit a few more interior lamps. Patrick's confession echoed in her mind, painting his earlier darkness in vivid, tragic colors. She gathered supplies from the shelves, filling a burlap sack with coffee, beans, salt pork, and a box of Winchester ammunition. "There's a storeroom out back with a cot," she said as she packed. "You're welcome to sleep there tonight instead of camping. And these supplies are yours, no payment needed. You earned them." Patrick started to protest, but Sarah held up her hand. "You helped this town tonight. Let the town help you in return. It's how things work in Red Bluff." For the first time, a hint of a smile touched his lips. "You're a kind woman, Miss Fitzgerald. Your father raised you right." "He did," Sarah agreed, a familiar ache settling in her chest. "Lost him 3 years ago to pneumonia. He taught me that a community survives by taking care of its own." "Yet you light the lanterns every night alone," Patrick observed. "Seems like hard work for one person." Sarah moved to the window, gazing out at the lanterns glowing against the now complete darkness. "Someone has to do it. People need light to find their way home." She turned back to him, struck suddenly by the way the lamplight caught in his eyes, turning them almost silver. "Besides, it helps me feel close to him. Papa always said that a single light in the darkness can save a life." "He was right about that," Patrick said quietly. "Those lanterns guided me here tonight when I was about ready to give up and sleep in a ditch somewhere." Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits who had both known loss and learned to carry on despite it. Sarah broke the moment by bustling toward the back door, Patrick following with his supplies. The storeroom was small but clean, with a narrow cot, a washstand, and a small window that overlooked the alley. Sarah lit the lamp on the washstand and turned to find Patrick watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Miss Fitzgerald," he began, then paused as though weighing his words. "What you do, lighting those lanterns every evening, that's more than just maintaining a routine. That's giving hope to people whether you realize it or not." "It's just lanterns," Sarah said, feeling suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. "No," Patrick said firmly, "it's more than that. When I rode into town tonight, exhausted and nearly broke, wondering if I'd made a mistake coming to California, I saw those lights appearing one by one in the dusk. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt something other than emptiness." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "You light those lanterns, Miss Fitzgerald, and in doing so, you light up the darkness that follows men like me. You probably don't even realize how many lives you've touched with that simple act." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty and intensity. "I just do what needs doing," she managed to say. "That's what makes it matter," Patrick replied. He seemed to realize he had moved quite close and he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Apologies. I don't mean to make you uncomfortable. It's been a long day." "No apology needed," Sarah said quickly. "Rest well, Mr. Vance. Come to the front door in the morning before you head to the Morrison Ranch. I'll have coffee ready and can draw you a map." She left before he could respond, her heart beating faster than the simple conversation warranted. In the main store, she locked up and extinguished most of the lamps, leaving only one burning as she climbed the stairs to her small apartment above the shop. Through her window, she could see the lanterns she had lit, their flames steady in the still night air. Sleep came slowly, her mind replaying Patrick's words and the look in his eyes when he had spoken of her lanterns lighting his darkness. She had performed that task every evening for years without considering its deeper meaning. Yet this stranger had seen something she had missed. More troubling, his presence had stirred something in her long, dormant heart, a flutter of possibility she had thought buried with her youthful dreams of romance. Morning arrived with the harsh cry of roosters and the rattle of wagons beginning their daily routes. Sarah dressed quickly in a simple blue calico dress and descended to the store, where she started coffee on the small stove in the back room. Patrick emerged from the storeroom looking somewhat refreshed, his face clean-shaven and his hair dampened and combed back. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Smells good." Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured for him to sit at the small table where she took her meals. As they drank in companionable silence, she sketched a simple map on a piece of brown paper, marking the route to the Morrison Ranch and noting landmarks. "Tell Frank Morrison that I sent you," she said, sliding the map across the table. "Mention that you helped with the situation last night. Word will have reached him by now, and he appreciates men who can keep their heads in difficult circumstances." Patrick studied the map, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Miss Fitzgerald, I want you to know that I plan to stay in Red Bluff if I can find steady work. Last night, talking to that man, helping him see past his pain, that reminded me of something." "What's that?" Sarah asked, cradling her coffee cup. "That maybe I don't have to keep running. Maybe there's a place where I can stop and try to build something again, even if it's just a quiet life with honest work." He met her eyes directly. "This town feels right. You feel right." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond simple conversation. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she did not look away. "I hope you find what you're looking for here," she said softly. "God knows this town could use more good men." Patrick stood, settling his hat on his head. "I'll be back, Miss Fitzgerald. One way or another, I'll be back." He paused at the door, looking back at her with that intensity that made her breath catch. "And when I return, I'd like to help you light those lanterns, if you'll let me." He was gone before she could formulate a response, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Sarah sat motionless for a long moment, her coffee growing cold in her hands as she processed the profound shift that had occurred in her carefully ordered life. A stranger had arrived, seen straight through to the heart of her lonely ritual, and offered not pity but companionship. More than that, he had looked at her as though she mattered, as though her simple act of lighting lanterns made her someone special. The day progressed with its usual rhythm of customers and chores. Mrs. Chen came in for sewing supplies and mentioned that her son Tommy could not stop talking about the brave stranger who had stopped the drunk man without violence. The blacksmith needed nails and wire, paying with coins that Sarah carefully recorded in her ledger. Old Samuel Foster, who ran a small cattle operation south of town, stopped by for tobacco and coffee, sharing the news that the Morrison Ranch had indeed hired a new hand that very morning. "Young fellow named Vance," Samuel said, tamping tobacco into his pipe. "Frank says he's got a good way with horses. You know anything about him, Sarah?" "He stayed in my storeroom last night," Sarah admitted. "Seemed like a decent man who's had some hard times." Samuel nodded sagely. "Most good men have. It's the hard times that prove whether someone's got character or not." He lit his pipe and puffed contemplatively. "Frank mentioned Vance talked about settling here permanent if things work out. Rare to see a drifter want to put down roots." After Samuel left, Sarah found herself hoping Patrick would succeed at the ranch. The thought of him leaving after just one night felt wrong somehow, as though the universe had conspired to bring them together for a reason. She scolded herself for such fanciful thinking, yet could not quite suppress the hope that bloomed stubbornly in her chest. Dusk arrived as it always did, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sarah collected her matches and stepped onto the porch, reaching for the first lantern. As the flame caught and steadied, she heard hoofbeats approaching from the north. Her heart began to pound even before she saw Patrick riding toward her on a different horse, a sturdy bay that moved with the fresh energy of a well-rested animal. He dismounted and tied the horse, then climbed the steps to stand beside her. Without a word, he pulled out his own matches and lit the second lantern while she lit the third. They moved in silent coordination down the porch, lighting each lantern in turn until all six glowed warmly against the deepening twilight. "You came back," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "I said I would," Patrick replied. He stood close enough that she could smell the honest scent of leather and horses and clean sweat. "Got the job at Morrison's ranch. Frank's a fair man, pays decent, and the bunkhouse is clean. But more than that, he's willing to give me a chance to prove myself, maybe even work up to foreman if I do well." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, genuine pleasure warming her voice. "You must be relieved." "I am," Patrick agreed. "But the best part of today was knowing I'd get to come here tonight to help you with this." He gestured toward the lanterns. "To spend even a few minutes in your company." Sarah's breath caught. She had received compliments from men before, awkward attempts at courtship that had never touched her heart. But Patrick's simple honesty, the way he said exactly what he meant without pretense or flowery language, that reached past all her defenses. "Would you like to come inside?" She found herself asking. "I usually make supper about now. It's nothing fancy, just stew and bread, but there's plenty." The smile that transformed Patrick's face made her glad she had been bold enough to ask. "I'd like that very much, Miss Fitzgerald." "Sarah," she said impulsively. "You should call me Sarah. Only if you'll call me Patrick." They shared a smile that felt like a promise, then Sarah led him inside. As she busied herself with reheating the stew she had made that morning and slicing thick pieces of bread, Patrick washed up at the basin and then helped set the table without being asked. The domestic ease of it struck Sarah as remarkable, given they had known each other less than a day. Over supper, Patrick spoke more about his day at the ranch, the horses he had worked with, the other cowhands who seemed friendly enough, and Frank Morrison's straightforward way of running his operation. Sarah shared stories of her regular customers, the rhythms of small-town commerce, and her plans to possibly expand the store's inventory if business continued steady. "Your father built something solid here," Patrick observed. "You've maintained it well, but I can see you've got ideas for making it even better." "Papa was content with keeping things the same," Sarah admitted, "but I think Red Bluff is growing. The railroad talks keep getting more serious, and if they run a line through here, this town could double or triple in size within a few years. I want to be ready for that." Patrick leaned back in his chair, regarding her with open admiration. "Beauty, kindness, and business sense. You're quite a woman, Sarah Fitzgerald." Heat flooded her cheeks again, but Sarah found herself enjoying the feeling rather than being embarrassed by it. "And you're quite the charmer when you want to be, Patrick Vance." "I'm not trying to charm you," he said seriously. "I'm just telling the truth as I see it." After they finished eating, Patrick insisted on helping wash the dishes despite Sarah's protests. As they worked side by side, their hands occasionally brushing in the soapy water, Sarah felt a connection building between them that went beyond simple attraction. There was an ease to Patrick's presence, as though they had known each other for years rather than hours. "I should head back to the ranch," Patrick said reluctantly when the last dish was dried and put away. "Early start tomorrow." They walked together to the front porch where the lantern still burned steadily. Patrick paused at the top of the steps, turning back to face Sarah. "Can I come tomorrow evening?" he asked. "To help with the lanterns again." "I'd like that," Sarah said softly. "I'd like that very much." Patrick reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently took her hand. His palm was calloused from work, warm and strong. "These past 2 years, I've been living in darkness, Sarah. Just moving from place to place, working jobs, never feeling anything but empty. But tonight, standing here with you, lighting those lanterns and sharing a meal, I feel like maybe I can find my way back to the light." Sarah squeezed his hand, her throat tight with emotion. "I know something about darkness, too. After Papa died, I kept the store going because I had to, because giving up wasn't an option. But I was just going through motions, lighting lanterns and selling goods and never really feeling alive." She looked up at him, seeing her own hope reflected in his eyes. "You make me feel alive again." They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the lantern light dancing across their faces. Then Patrick raised her hand to his lips and placed a gentle kiss on her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made Sarah's eyes sting with unshed tears. "Good night, Sarah," he said quietly. "Good night, Patrick." She watched him ride away into the darkness beyond the reach of her lanterns, then remained on the porch long after he disappeared, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart beat with renewed vigor. One day, she thought wonderingly. One single day, and her entire world had shifted on its axis. The following weeks fell into a pattern that brought Sarah more happiness than she had known in years. Patrick came every evening to help light the lanterns, and they would share supper and conversation afterward. Sometimes they spoke of serious things, their pasts and losses and hopes for the future. Other times they simply enjoyed each other's company, laughing at small absurdities or discussing the day's minor dramas. The town noticed, of course. In a settlement the size of Red Bluff, 2 young, unmarried people spending time together could hardly escape comment. But the talk was generally approving. Patrick had proven himself a hard-working, reliable man in his weeks at the Morrison Ranch, and Sarah was well loved for her fairness and generosity. If anyone thought their courtship, for that was clearly what it had become, was moving quickly, they kept it to themselves. Frank Morrison stopped by the store one Saturday morning in mid-November, ostensibly to buy supplies but really, Sarah suspected, to take her measure. The rancher was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed little. "Patrick Vance is one of the best hands I've hired in years," Frank said without preamble as Sarah tallied his purchases. "Works hard, keeps to himself, but he's good with the other men, never complains, always volunteers for the difficult jobs." "I'm glad he's working out," Sarah said carefully, unsure where this conversation was headed. Frank leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "He talks about you, you know. Nothing improper, mind you, but it's clear you matter to him. I've seen a change in him these past weeks. He came to me a broken man running from ghosts, and now he's got purpose again. That's your doing, Sarah." "He's helped me too," Sarah admitted quietly. "More than he probably realizes. That's what I figured." Frank straightened, gathering his parcels. "I wanted you to know that I've offered him the assistant foreman position. Better pay. A small cabin of his own on the property. He's earned it, but I also thought you should know that he's planning to stay in Red Bluff long term. Seems like information you might want to have." After Frank left, Sarah stood behind the counter feeling as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. A cabin of his own meant permanence, roots, the kind of stability that a man needed before he could consider taking a wife. The thought made her dizzy with a mixture of hope and fear. Was she ready for this? Could she open her heart fully to Patrick, risk the kind of loss she had experienced when her father died? That evening, when Patrick arrived to help with the lanterns, Sarah could barely contain her nervous energy. They lit the lanterns in their usual companionable silence, but as they stood on the porch watching full darkness descend, Patrick took her hand and drew her gently around to face him. "Frank told me he spoke to you today," Patrick said. "About the promotion." "He did," Sarah confirmed. "I'm happy for you. You've worked hard for this." "Sarah, when I first rode into Red Bluff, I thought I was just looking for work to keep body and soul together while I figured out where to drift next. But then I met you, and everything changed." His hands moved to cup her face gently, his thumbs brushing her cheeks with exquisite tenderness. "You changed everything. These past weeks with you have been the happiest I've known since before the fire. You make me want to be the man I used to be, the man who believed in building a future instead of just surviving one day at a time." "Patrick," Sarah whispered, her hands coming up to rest on his wrists, holding him close. "I know it hasn't been long," he continued, his voice urgent now. "I know people might say we should wait longer, be more cautious. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and when you find someone who lights up your darkness, you don't let that person go." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "You light lanterns every evening to guide people home, Sarah. But you've done more than that for me. You've given me a reason to stop wandering. You've lit my darkest days with your glow." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "You've done the same for me. I was just going through motions, existing but not truly living. You've reminded me that there's more to life than duty and routine. You've reminded me what it feels like to hope." Patrick leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was at once gentle and passionate, restrained and desperate. Sarah's hand slid up to his shoulders, then around his neck, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened. Every lonely evening, every moment of grief, every fear about the future melted away in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Patrick rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Sarah. I don't have much to offer yet, just a small cabin and a steady job, but I swear I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. I'll help you light your lanterns every evening for the rest of our lives if you'll let me. Light my darkest days with your glow, and I'll do everything in my power to keep your light burning bright." "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation, the word emerging as part laugh, part sob. "Yes, Patrick. Yes." They kissed again, and this time there was no restraint, just the pure joy of two people who had found each other against all odds. When they finally drew apart, Patrick produced a simple gold band from his pocket, clearly old but polished to a shine. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "One of the only things I managed to save from the fire. I've carried it with me for 2 years, never able to part with it, but also never imagining I'd have reason to give it to someone." He slipped it onto Sarah's finger where it fit perfectly. "I think Mama would be happy to know it found its way to you." Sarah looked at the ring through her tears, then up at Patrick's face, seeing the hope and love shining in his eyes. "We should get married soon," she said. "I don't want to wait." "Neither do I," Patrick agreed. "How about 2 weeks? That'll give you time to prepare whatever you need and me time to fix up the cabin properly." 2 weeks, Sarah agreed and sealed the promise with another kiss. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and barely contained excitement. Sarah worked with Mrs. Chen to alter a beautiful cream-colored dress that had belonged to her mother, adding new lace and taking in the waist. Patrick spent every spare moment at his new cabin, whitewashing the walls, repairing the roof, and building furniture from rough lumber. Frank Morrison donated a cast iron stove, and several of the ranch hands helped install it properly. The wedding took place on a crisp Saturday morning in early December at the small church on the edge of town. The entire population of Red Bluff seemed to have turned out, cramming into the pews and spilling out onto the church steps. Sarah walked down the aisle alone, her father's absence a bittersweet ache, but when she saw Patrick waiting at the altar, resplendent in new clothes with his hair freshly cut, that ache faded in the face of overwhelming joy. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity, speaking of the sacred bond of marriage and the way two people could bring out the best in each other. When Patrick repeated his vows, his voice strong and clear, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life," Patrick said, holding both her hands in his. "To light lanterns with you every evening and build a life together that honors both our pasts while embracing our future. You are my light in the darkness, Sarah, and I will never take that gift for granted." Sarah's own vows came from her heart rather than any rehearsed script. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to share your burdens and your joys, to be your partner in all things. You saw me when I felt invisible, valued me when I had forgotten my own worth. I will love you fiercely and faithfully until my last breath." When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Patrick pulled Sarah into his arms and kissed her with such tender passion that several of the older women in the congregation sighed audibly. The church erupted in applause and cheers, and suddenly they were surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and blessings. The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of contributed food, and a small band provided music for dancing. Patrick proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding Sarah through reels and waltzes with confidence. As they spun around the floor, Sarah caught glimpses of smiling faces, all the people who made up the fabric of her daily life, sharing in her happiness. As evening approached, Sarah felt a familiar pull. She looked at Patrick and saw understanding in his eyes. Together, they slipped away from the celebration and walked hand in hand to the general store, where the unlit lanterns waited on their hooks. "Our first evening as husband and wife," Patrick said softly, pulling out his matches. "Seems right to spend it doing this together." They lit the lanterns as the sun set behind the mountains, each flame a small declaration against the darkness. When the last lantern was lit, Patrick wrapped his arms around Sarah from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched the lights glow steadily. "You know what I thought the first time I saw you lighting these lanterns?" he asked quietly. "I thought you looked like an angel, bringing light to the world one flame at a time. And then, when you looked at me, when you offered me water and kindness without knowing anything about me, I felt something I thought had died in that barn fire. Hope." Sarah turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to frame his face. "You gave me hope too. Hope that I could be more than just the woman who runs the store, that there was still romance and passion and love waiting for me if I was brave enough to reach for it." "Then we saved each other," Patrick said simply. He kissed her softly, then with growing intensity, and Sarah responded with all the love and desire she had been holding in check during their courtship. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Patrick swept Sarah up into his arms, making her gasp with surprise and laughter. "Time to take my wife home," he announced, carrying her down the steps toward the horse and small wagon he had borrowed for the occasion. The cabin that had seemed so rustic and small when Sarah first saw it now glowed with warmth and possibility. Patrick had strung white curtains in the windows, built a sturdy bed frame and filled the mattress with fresh straw, and even managed to acquire a colorful rag rug for the floor. A fire burned cheerfully in the new stove, and Sarah could see that Patrick had set the table for two. "I thought you might be hungry after all that celebrating," Patrick explained, setting her gently on her feet. "Nothing fancy, just cold chicken and bread and some of that apple pie Mrs. Palmer sent over." They ate by lamplight, talking and laughing, the intimacy of being alone together for the first time both thrilling and slightly nerve-wracking. When the meal was finished, Patrick took Sarah's hand and led her to the bed, where he proceeded to make love to her with such tenderness and passion that she wept with the intensity of it. Afterward, lying wrapped in his arms beneath a quilt his mother had made years before, Sarah felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." Patrick's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. And I know it's frightening to love something this much, to risk losing it. But Sarah, even if I had known from the beginning that we'd only have a short time together, I still would have chosen this, chosen you, every single time." Sarah turned to kiss him, and their lovemaking the second time was less tentative, more confident as they learned each other's bodies and responses. When they finally fell asleep near dawn, tangled together in comfortable exhaustion, both wore expressions of profound contentment. The months that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. She and Patrick settled into married life with remarkable ease, their routines meshing smoothly. Patrick would rise before dawn to begin his work at the ranch, while Sarah opened the store and managed the steady stream of customers. In the evenings, they would meet at the store to light the lanterns together, a ritual that had become sacred to them both, before heading home to share supper and their day's stories. As winter gave way to spring of 1879, Sarah began to suspect she might be carrying a child. She waited to be certain before telling Patrick, wanting the moment to be special. On a warm evening in April, as they stood on the store porch watching the lanterns glow against the twilight, she took his hand and placed it over her still flat stomach. "There's a new light growing," she said softly. "Right here." Patrick's eyes went wide with understanding, then filled with tears. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be. Mrs. Palmer says all the signs point to a baby coming in the fall, probably October." Patrick let out a whoop of joy that startled a flock of birds from the nearby trees, then picked Sarah up and spun her around carefully, both of them laughing and crying at once. "We're going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a family." That night, lying in bed with Patrick's hand resting protectively on her stomach, Sarah felt a fierce joy mixed with inevitable fear. She had not forgotten Patrick's story of losing his first family to fire, and she knew he must be remembering it too. "I'm afraid," Patrick admitted quietly, as though reading her thoughts. "Afraid of something happening to you or the baby, afraid I'll fail again." "You didn't fail before," Sarah said firmly. "What happened to your family was a terrible tragedy, but it wasn't your fault. Lightning striking a barn could happen whether you were there or not." "I was drunk in a saloon instead of home where I belonged," Patrick countered, his voice harsh with old guilt. Sarah turned to face him, taking his face in her hands. "Listen to me, Patrick Vance. You are a good man who has suffered more than anyone should have to suffer. But you survived, you kept going, and you found your way to me. Our child is going to be lucky to have you as a father, and I won't let you waste energy on guilt over things you cannot change. Do you understand?" Patrick kissed her fiercely. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do," Sarah insisted. "We deserve each other and we deserve this happiness. Let yourself have it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot summer months. Sarah worked in the store until she simply could not stand for long periods, at which point she hired young Emily Brooks to help with the heavier tasks and longer hours. Patrick fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, bringing her wildflowers he found on the range, building a beautiful cradle from smooth pine wood. The baby arrived on a cool October evening, just as Mrs. Palmer had predicted. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Patrick, pacing frantically outside while the midwife worked, thought he might go mad with worry. But when Mrs. Palmer finally emerged to announce that he had a healthy son and Sarah was tired but well, Patrick sank to his knees in grateful prayer. They named him Thomas, after Sarah's father, with the middle name of James for Patrick's father. Little Thomas had his mother's auburn hair and his father's blue eyes, and from the moment Patrick held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his weathered face, Sarah knew that the ghosts of his past had finally been laid to rest. "Hello, Thomas," Patrick whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm your papa, and I promise I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you safe and loved and happy. You and your mama, you're my whole world." The first year of Thomas's life passed in the bleary exhaustion and overwhelming love that comes with new parenthood. Patrick proved to be a devoted father, waking for nighttime feedings even though Sarah nursed the baby, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the Vance family became a fixture in Red Bluff. Patrick had been promoted to foreman, overseeing the Morrison Ranch's operations with skill and fairness. Sarah had expanded the general store to include a larger selection of goods, particularly items for women and children, and business thrived. Every evening, weather permitting, the three of them would stand on the store porch and light the lanterns together, Thomas giggling with delight at the flames. "Light," the boy would say, pointing at the lanterns with chubby fingers. "Pretty light." "That's right," Patrick would tell him, hoisting the child onto his shoulders. "Your mama brings light to the darkness, just like she brought light to my life and yours." When Thomas was 2 years old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. And in the summer of 1882, they welcomed a daughter they named Catherine Rose. Where Thomas had been an easy baby, Catherine proved to be colicky and demanding, but she had Sarah's green eyes and Patrick's stubborn determination, and they loved her fiercely. The years rolled on with the steady rhythm of family life and honest work. Thomas started school and proved to be a bright student with his mother's head for numbers. Catherine grew into a spirited little girl who followed her older brother everywhere and had her father wrapped firmly around her tiny finger. A third child, a son they named Samuel, arrived in 1885, completing their family. Patrick thrived as foreman of the Morrison Ranch, implementing new breeding programs and irrigation systems that increased productivity significantly. Frank Morrison, growing older and with no children of his own, began talking about selling the ranch to Patrick when he was ready to retire. It was an opportunity beyond anything Patrick had imagined when he first rode into Red Bluff 7 years earlier. Sarah's store had become a gathering place for the women of Red Bluff, a place to exchange news and support along with goods and services. She had hired 2 full-time employees and was considering opening a second location in the growing settlement of Cottonwood, 10 miles to the north. But through all the changes and growth, one ritual remained constant. Every evening at dusk, unless weather made it impossible, Sarah and Patrick lit the lanterns together. Sometimes all three children joined them, and sometimes it was just the two of them while the children played inside. But that moment of standing together, touching flame to wick, watching light push back darkness, that remained sacred. On a warm evening in June of 1886, after the children had been put to bed, Sarah and Patrick stood on their cabin porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dark. Patrick's arm was around Sarah's waist, her head resting on his shoulder, and the comfortable silence between them spoke of years of love and partnership. "You ever think about that first night?" Patrick asked quietly. "When I rode into town nearly broken and you offered me water and kindness." "I think about it often," Sarah admitted. "I wonder what would have happened if you had ridden past Red Bluff, chosen a different town, a different road." "I'd still be wandering," Patrick said with certainty. "Still running from ghosts, drinking too much, working jobs that meant nothing. You saved my life, Sarah. As surely as if you'd pulled me from a raging river, you saved me." Sarah turned to look up at him, seeing the same love and devotion in his eyes that had been there on their wedding day. "You saved mine too. I was so lonely, Patrick, going through motions and telling myself I was content. But I wasn't living, just existing. You taught me the difference." "The lanterns," Patrick said thoughtfully. "You were bringing light to everyone else, but your own life was dark. And now look at us. Look at what we've built." Sarah smiled, thinking of their 3 sleeping children, the thriving businesses, the respect and affection of their community, the deep love that had only grown stronger over 7 years of marriage. "You said that first night that I should light your darkest days with my glow. But Patrick, you've been doing the same for me all along." Patrick kissed her softly, a kiss that held all the promise and passion of their early courtship along with the deeper intimacy of long partnership. "Then we'll just have to keep lighting up the darkness for each other, for as many years as God grants us." "For as many years as we have," Sarah agreed. The years continued to unfold with the usual mixture of joy and challenge that makes up a life well lived. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved working with his father on the ranch and showed a natural gift for animal husbandry. Catherine proved to be fiercely intelligent with a talent for business that rivaled her mother's, often helping in the store and suggesting improvements with uncanny insight. Samuel was the dreamer of the family, always sketching pictures and making up elaborate stories. In 1892, Frank Morrison made good on his long-standing offer and sold the ranch to Patrick for a fair price that Patrick had been saving toward for years. The Morrison Ranch became the Vance Ranch, and Patrick threw himself into the work of ownership with characteristic determination and integrity. He treated his employees fairly, paid good wages, and continued to innovate in ways that made the ranch one of the most successful operations in Northern California. Sarah's business ventures had expanded to include not just the second store in Cottonwood, but also a mail-order catalog service that sent goods throughout the region. She had proven herself a shrewd businesswoman with a generous heart, often extending credit to families in genuine need and quietly donating to the church fund that helped the poorest members of the community. But success and prosperity had not changed the fundamental truth of their marriage. They still took time every evening to light the lanterns together, still talked and laughed and made love with the passion of newlyweds. Their children grew up watching a partnership built on mutual respect, honest communication, and unwavering devotion, learning lessons about love and marriage that no words could fully convey. Thomas married sweet Mary Dawson in 1895, and they built a house on the ranch property not far from the main house. When they welcomed Patrick and Sarah's first grandchild, a robust boy they named Patrick Thomas, Patrick Sr. wept openly, holding the infant with shaking hands and whispering prayers of gratitude. The ghosts of his first family, dead for nearly 20 years now, seemed finally and fully at peace. Catherine, true to her independent nature, announced at 19 that she wanted to attend business college in San Francisco. Patrick had reservations, but Sarah supported their daughter's ambitions, and Catherine left in the fall of 1897 to pursue her education. She wrote long letters home describing her studies and the exciting, overwhelming city life, and Sarah read them aloud to Patrick in the evenings, both of them proud and terrified in equal measure. Samuel, at 12, remained in Red Bluff, attending school and filling notebooks with his drawings and stories. He had inherited his father's kind heart and his mother's keen observation, and both parents suspected he would do something remarkable someday, though what form that might take remained to be seen. On a soft evening in June of 1898, Patrick and Sarah celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party attended by half the county. Their children and grandchild, their employees and friends, all gathered to honor a marriage that had become something of a local legend. The young cowboy who had ridden into town broken, and the woman who lit lanterns at dusk, finding each other and building a life that enriched everyone around them. It was the kind of story people loved to tell and retell. After the guests had departed and the children had taken the sleeping baby home, Patrick and Sarah walked hand in hand to the general store in Red Bluff, which Sarah still owned, though she no longer worked there daily. The same lanterns hung on the porch, though some had been replaced over the years, and together they lit each one as the sun set behind the familiar mountains. 20 years, Patrick said wonderingly, watching the flames catch and hold. 20 years since you agreed to marry me after knowing me only 2 weeks. Best decision I ever made, Sarah said firmly. She was 42 now, with silver threading through her auburn hair and lines around her eyes from years of laughter and sun. Patrick, at 48, had gone gray at the temples and moved with the careful precision of a man whose body had been well used by hard work. But to each other, they remained as beautiful as they had been that first night. I was so terrified, Patrick admitted. Terrified you would say no, terrified you would say yes, terrified I would somehow fail you the way I felt I'd failed my first family. But you wouldn't let me be afraid. You've never let me give in to fear. Sarah took both his hands in hers, standing in the glow of the lanterns they had lit together thousands of times now. And you gave me courage to want more than just surviving. You showed me that love was worth the risk, that building a family and a life together could heal old wounds. You kept your promise, Patrick. You've lit my darkest days with your glow, every single day for 20 years. Patrick pulled her close, kissing her with the same intensity that had marked their first kiss on this very porch 2 decades earlier. And you've done the same for me. Every evening, watching you light these lanterns, I'm reminded that even the darkest night can't stand against a single flame when it's tended with love and purpose. They stood together as full darkness fell, the lanterns casting circles of warm light that overlapped and merged, pushing back the shadows. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of Red Bluff settling in for the night, the community they had helped build and sustain through their work and generosity. You ever wonder what our lives would have been like if we hadn't met? Sarah asked softly. Never, Patrick said firmly. Because this is the only life I want. This life with you, with our children and grandchildren, with these lanterns and this town and everything we've built together. I don't believe in wondering about paths not taken. I believe in being grateful for the path we're on. Sarah smiled against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. I'm grateful, too, for every moment, even the hard ones, because we've walked through them together." They remained there until the lanterns burned low, then walked home hand in hand through streets lit by the very lanterns Sarah had been lighting for more than 20 years. Their cabin, expanded several times to accommodate their growing family, glowed with lamplight from the windows. It was a beacon of warmth and love, a testament to what two damaged people could build when they found each other at exactly the right moment. The years continued to pass, bringing the usual mixture of joy and sorrow. Catherine returned from San Francisco with a business degree, and a young man named David Fletcher, whom she married in 1899. They settled in Red Bluff, and Catherine took over management of both stores, implementing modern business practices that increased profits substantially. Samuel, at 14, began submitting his stories to newspapers and magazines, earning his first publication in 1900 and launching what would become a successful career as a journalist and author. More grandchildren arrived, filling Patrick and Sarah's lives with the chaos and delight of young voices and endless energy. Patrick, though he hired a manager to handle day-to-day ranch operations, remained active and engaged, teaching his grandsons to rope and ride, sharing with them the lessons life had taught him about resilience and redemption. Sarah, meanwhile, had become something of a matriarch in Red Bluff, the woman people came to for advice, support, and wisdom. She had lived through triumph and tragedy, built businesses and raised children, and somehow maintained her essential kindness and generosity through it all. The lanterns she lit each evening had become more than a practical service. They were a symbol of hope and continuity, a reminder that some things remained constant even as the world changed around them. In the spring of 1905, on the evening of their 27th anniversary, Patrick and Sarah sat on the porch of their home surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, and many of the friends who had witnessed their journey together. Thomas and Mary now had 3 children and managed much of the ranch's daily operations. Catherine and David had 2 daughters and lived in the large house Catherine had built on the edge of town, close to her stores. Samuel, at 20, had published his first book and was already working on his second while courting a minister's daughter from Sacramento. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Sarah stood and reached for the matches she always kept in her pocket. Patrick stood too, taking her hand. "Let's light them together," he said, as he had said thousands of times before. They moved down the porch, lighting each lantern in turn while their family watched. The grandchildren, who had grown up with this ritual, understood its importance even if they could not fully articulate why. The older folks in attendance remembered the night Patrick had ridden into town, the confrontation with Jack Henderson, the courtship that had seemed impossibly fast, yet somehow inevitable. When all the lanterns were lit, Patrick raised his glass of cider and looked at Sarah with eyes that still held all the love and devotion of that first night. "To my wife," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the evening air, "who lit my darkest days with her glow and continues to bring light to everyone she touches. You are the best part of my life, Sarah Vance, and I thank God for the day I rode into Red Bluff and found you standing on a porch lighting lanterns against the dark." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she raised her own glass. "And to my husband, who saw value in a lonely woman going through motions and reminded her what it meant to truly live. You've given me love, family, purpose, and joy beyond anything I imagined possible. Every day with you has been a gift." Their family and friends cheered and applauded, then broke into smaller conversations as the evening deepened. Patrick and Sarah stood together at the porch rail, watching the lanterns burn steadily, casting their warm light across the yard and into the street beyond. 27 years, Sarah mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we've been together forever. Both are true, Patrick said philosophically. He put his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him with the ease of long familiarity. Every day with you feels fresh and new, but I also can't remember what life was like before you. Can't imagine existing without you beside me. Then it's a good thing you don't have to, Sarah said softly. They stood like that as the party continued around them, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life of extraordinary light. The lanterns burned on, as they had for nearly 3 decades, faithful sentinels against the night. As more years passed, Patrick and Sarah moved into the gentler rhythms of later life. Patrick, now in his 60s, had fully retired from active ranch work, leaving operations to Thomas and a capable team of foremen. He spent his days raiding, working in the garden Sarah had planted, and playing with the ever-increasing number of grandchildren who seemed to constantly fill their house with noise and laughter. Sarah, too, had stepped back from daily business operations, though she still kept her hand in through weekly meetings with Catherine and occasional visits to the stores. She had taken up painting, a hobby she had always wanted to explore, and her watercolors of Red Bluff's landscapes and people began to decorate not just their own walls but those of friends and family throughout the region. But they never stopped lighting the lanterns together. Even when rain poured or snow fell, even when Patrick's joints ached with arthritis or Sarah felt the weariness of her years, they made their way to the store each evening at dusk and performed their sacred ritual. The lanterns had become part of Red Bluff's identity, featured in articles about the town, and pointed out to visitors as a beloved tradition. In 1915, the world beyond Red Bluff was embroiled in a terrible war in Europe, but the small California town remained relatively untouched by the distant conflict. Thomas's oldest son had enlisted despite his family's concerns, and they prayed for his safety while continuing with their daily lives. Sarah organized efforts to send care packages to soldiers, and Patrick helped with war bond drives, but mostly they focused on maintaining normalcy for their family and community. One evening in late October, as autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors, and the air turned crisp with the promise of winter, Patrick and Sarah prepared for their usual lantern lighting. Sarah, now 59, moved a bit slower than she once had, but her eyes were still bright with intelligence and warmth. Patrick, at 65, had become a distinguished-looking man with a full head of white hair and a bearing that spoke of confidence earned through years of honest living. They lit the lanterns in comfortable silence, the routine so ingrained that words were unnecessary. But as they stood watching the flames dance in the evening breeze, Patrick turned to Sarah with an expression of deep contentment. "You know what I've been thinking about lately?" he asked. "What's that?" Sarah replied, taking his hand. "How everything in my life, every joy and every sorrow, every triumph and failure, led me to that moment when I rode into Red Bluff and saw you lighting these lanterns. If even one thing had been different, if I had chosen a different road or arrived a day earlier or later, we might never have met. And I can't imagine a greater tragedy than never knowing you." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. After 37 years of marriage, Patrick could still make her feel like a young woman in love for the first time. "I think about that too," she admitted. "How the worst day of my life, the day Papa died, eventually led to the best thing in my life, meeting you. It makes me believe there's a design to things, even when we can't see it in the moment." "A design that brought us together," Patrick agreed, "and gave us this beautiful life." He gestured broadly, encompassing not just the lanterns and the store but the entire town, their family, everything they had built together. They stood in the glow of the lanterns they had lit together for more than 13,000 evenings. Two people who had found love when they least expected it and nurtured it into something that enriched everyone around them. The darkness pressed close beyond the circles of light, but it could not touch them. They had learned long ago that love, tended faithfully and honestly, created a light no darkness could extinguish. As they walked home that evening, Patrick's arm around Sarah's shoulders and her arm around his waist, they passed neighbors who called out friendly greetings and young people who moved aside respectfully. They were institutions in Red Bluff now, the couple whose love story had become legend, whose devotion to each other and their community had helped shape the town's character. That night, lying in bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Sarah turned to Patrick and traced the familiar lines of his face with gentle fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Patrick asked, though his eyes suggested he knew. "For riding into Red Bluff that night. For helping Jack Henderson instead of walking away. For seeing me, truly seeing me when I felt invisible. For keeping your promise to light my darkest days." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "For loving me so well for so long." Patrick captured her hand and kissed her palm, his eyes shining in the moonlight. "The privilege has been mine. You took a broken, wandering man and gave him purpose, family, love. You showed me that losing everything doesn't mean you can't build something beautiful again. I'm the one who should be thanking you." "Then we're even," Sarah said, snuggling close to him. "No," Patrick corrected gently. "We're blessed. There's a difference." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms as they had thousands of times before, two souls so intertwined that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The years rolled on with increasing speed, as they do when one reaches the later stages of life. Grandchildren grew up and had children of their own, making Patrick and Sarah great-grandparents multiple times over. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's careful management. Catherine's business empire expanded to include stores in 3 towns, and a thriving mail-order operation that shipped goods throughout California and beyond. Samuel published 6 books and became a respected voice in American literature, though he always returned to Red Bluff for important family occasions. Through it all, Patrick and Sarah remained each other's constant companion, facing the challenges of aging with grace and humor. When Patrick's hearing began to fail, Sarah learned to speak more clearly and position herself where he could see her face. When Sarah developed arthritis that made her hands stiff and painful, Patrick took over more of the household tasks without complaint or fanfare. They adapted to each other's changing needs as naturally as breathing, their partnership only deepening with time. In the spring of 1925, Red Bluff held a massive celebration to honor Patrick and Sarah's 50th wedding anniversary. It seemed like half of Northern California turned out for the event, which included a parade, a formal dinner, and speeches from local dignitaries. The governor of California sent a congratulatory letter that was read aloud to much applause. But the moment that meant the most to Patrick and Sarah came at dusk, when their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren joined them on the store porch to light the lanterns together. 3 generations stood together as the sun set, each person lighting a lantern while Patrick and Sarah watched with tears streaming down their faces. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. The light that Patrick and Sarah had maintained for 50 years was being passed on to those who came after them, a legacy of love and service that would continue long after they were gone. 50 years ago today, Patrick said when all the lanterns were lit, I married the woman who saved my life, who lit my darkest days with her glow and continues to be the light that guides me home. Sarah, my love, my partner, my best friend, thank you for 50 years of love beyond measure. Thank you for seeing worth in a broken cowboy who wandered into town with nothing but ghosts for company. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Sarah, now 72 but still beautiful in Patrick's eyes, smiled through her tears. And thank you, my darling husband, for choosing to stop wandering when you found me, for keeping your promise to light lanterns with me every evening, for giving me children and grandchildren and a love story worthy of the romance novels I used to read as a girl. You are the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying. I love you more today than I did 50 years ago, and I didn't think that was possible. They kissed to thunderous applause and cheers, and if the kiss was gentler and slower than those of their youth, it held no less passion or devotion. Their family surrounded them, embracing them, celebrating them, grateful for the example they had set and the love they had modeled. As the celebration wound down and the family dispersed to their various homes, Patrick and Sarah remained on the porch, watching the lanterns burn. They sat side by side on the bench Patrick had built decades earlier, holding hands in comfortable silence. 50 years, Sarah mused. Where did the time go? Into this, Patrick said, gesturing at the town around them, the family they had created, the life they had built. Every moment well spent. I have no regrets, Sarah, not a single one. Neither do I, Sarah agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. When I was young, I used to dream about love and romance, about finding a partner who would cherish me. But my dreams weren't big enough. What we have, what we've built together, it's bigger and better than anything I could have imagined. That's because we dreamed it together, Patrick said softly. And we worked toward it together. Love isn't just a feeling, though God knows I feel it strongly every time I look at you. Love is a choice we make every day, to put each other first, to build each other up, to weather storms together and celebrate sunshine together. We've chosen each other every single day for 50 years, and I'd choose you for 50 more if I could. They sat like that until the lanterns began to burn low, then walked slowly home through streets they had walked together thousands of times. Their bodies might have been older and slower, but their hearts remained as young and entwined as they had been on their wedding night. The years after their 50th anniversary passed with increasing speed and gathering shadows. Patrick developed a persistent cough in the winter of 1927 that no amount of doctoring seemed to cure. By spring, he had grown noticeably frailer, his tall frame seeming to shrink in on itself. Sarah, her own health beginning to fail, refused to leave his side, tending to him with the same devoted care he had shown her throughout their marriage. On a warm evening in June, as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Patrick insisted on getting out of bed and dressing in his best clothes. Sarah, understanding what he wanted without him having to say it, helped him dress, and then supported him as they made their slow way to the general store in town. Their great-grandson, Patrick's namesake, drove them in his automobile, a modern convenience that Patrick had never quite gotten used to. At the store, 3 generations of family waited. They had come when word spread that Patrick wanted to light the lanterns one last time. Sarah and Patrick stood together on the porch as they had done for 49 years, though now their hands shook as they struck the matches and touched them to the wicks. The lanterns caught and burned bright against the gathering dusk. Patrick looked at each one with satisfaction, then turned to Sarah with a smile that held all the love of their long years together. "Light my darkest days with your glow," he whispered, repeating the words he had said so many years ago. "You've done that, Sarah." Every single day you've been my light. And you've been mine, Sarah replied, tears streaming down her weathered face. Always my light, my love, my everything. They stood together in the glow of the lanterns they had lit together countless times, surrounded by the family their love had created. And Patrick knew a peace he had never thought possible after losing his first family all those years ago. He had been given a second chance at love and life, and he had spent every moment of it wisely and well. Patrick passed away peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by his family, holding Sarah's hand. His last words were the lanterns, and everyone knew he was telling Sarah to keep lighting them, to keep bringing light to the darkness even in her grief. Sarah, devastated but determined to honor her husband's memory, did exactly that. Despite her own failing health, she went to the store every evening at dusk and lit the lanterns. Sometimes she was alone, but more often she was accompanied by her children or grandchildren, who could not bear the thought of her facing the ritual without support. On a crisp autumn evening in October of 1928, almost exactly 50 years after she and Patrick had first lit lanterns together, Sarah stood on the store porch with her family around her. She was 75 now, her body worn out from age and grief. She lit the first lantern with shaking hands, but as the flame caught and burned bright, she felt Patrick's presence so strongly it was as though he stood beside her. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the gathering darkness. "I kept our lanterns burning, my love. And soon, very soon, I'll come find you and we'll light lanterns together again." Sarah passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks later, having lived a life of extraordinary love and service. At her funeral, which was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched, Reverend Matthews spoke of the lanterns and what they represented. "Sarah Fitzgerald Vance spent her life bringing light to darkness," he said. "First literally lighting lanterns that guided people home, and then figuratively through her kindness, generosity, and love. She and her husband Patrick showed us all what true partnership looks like, what it means to commit yourself wholly to another person, and to build a life together that enriches everyone around you. Their light will continue to shine through their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and through all of us who were blessed to know them." The family decided that the lantern lighting ritual would continue, passed down through the generations as a tribute to Patrick and Sarah's love story. To this day, the lanterns on the general store porch in Red Bluff, California, are lit every evening at dusk by members of the Vance family, a tradition that has endured for more than a century. The original store building is now a museum dedicated to the history of Red Bluff, and the story of the cowboy who rode into town one October evening in 1878, and the woman who lit lanterns at dusk, is told to every visitor. But more than the physical lanterns or the museum or the stories, Patrick and Sarah's true legacy lives on in the model they provided of what love could be when tended faithfully and honestly. They showed that broken people can heal, that second chances are possible, that a chance meeting can change everything. They proved that lighting a single flame against the darkness, whether literal or metaphorical, matters more than anyone might realize. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the Vance Ranch, still shop at the stores Catherine built, still read Samuel's books. The family gathers every June for a reunion to celebrate Patrick and Sarah's wedding anniversary, and every October to remember the night a lonely cowboy rode into Red Bluff and found the woman who would become his everything. And every evening at dusk, without fail, the lanterns are lit by someone who carries Patrick and Sarah's blood in their veins and their love story in their heart. The light continues to shine, pushing back darkness, guiding people home, reminding everyone who sees it that true love, the kind that lights up the darkest days, is not just possible but worth every risk and sacrifice required to build and maintain it. Patrick Vance and Sarah Fitzgerald came together in darkness and created light that continues to shine long after they have gone. Their story reminds us that we all have the power to bring light to others, to see worth in broken people, to build something beautiful from loss and loneliness. In the end, that is the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind. Not wealth or fame or accomplishments, but love shared generously and faithfully, lighting the way for those who come after, showing them that darkness, no matter how deep, can always be defeated by a single faithful flame tended with love and purpose.